room was quiet in a way Freddie Mercury had never known before. No music, no applause, no spotlight to hide behind. Just a son and his father, separated by years of silence, pride, misunderstandings, and unspoken pain. In his final days, as his strength faded and time became brutally honest, Freddie Mercury carried one regret heavier than any crown he had ever worn. It wasn't fame. It wasn't excess. It wasn't even fear of death. It was his father. What happened in that private moment, when Freddie gathered what little strength he had left and asked for forgiveness, would reveal a side of him the world never saw. Vulnerable, human, unprotected. Before this story ends, you will discover why their relationship was fractured, what words Freddie struggled to say, and how that final plea reshaped the meaning of peace for him. This is not the story of a rock legend. This is the story of a son. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss our emotional stories about Freddie Mercury. The silence between them had lasted decades. Freddie Mercury lay awake in the dim light of his bedroom, listening to the slow rhythm of his own breathing. The world outside continued as it always had. Cars passing, distant voices, life refusing to pause. But inside that room, time felt fragile, measured, precious. His body was tired in ways no performance had ever caused. Every movement carried weight now. Every thought lingered longer than it used to. And one thought returned again and again. His father, Jabal Sara, had always been a man of structure, discipline, and tradition, raised with strict values. He believed deeply in duty, restraint, and respectability. From the moment Farrakh, the boy who would become Freddie Mercury, had begun drifting away from those values, something between them had quietly fractured. It hadn't been a dramatic break. It was worse. It had been distance. Freddie remembered being young, standing in front of his father with ideas too big, too strange, too loud. Music that didn't fit expectations. Clothes that invited questions. A personality that refused to be contained. His father hadn't shouted. He had simply disapproved. And for a son desperate to be seen, that silence cut deeper than anger ever could. As Freddie's career exploded, the distance grew. Fame didn't heal it. If anything, it widened the gap. The more Freddie became himself in public, the more complicated things felt at home. Success did not equal acceptance. On stage, Freddie was fearless, unapologetic, magnificent. He commanded crowds with a confidence that bordered on myth. But off stage, when thoughts of family surfaced, he became quieter, more guarded. He loved his parents. But love did not always mean understanding. In private moments, Freddie would sometimes rehearse conversations that never happened, words he wanted to say, questions he never asked. Do you see me now? Were you ever proud? Did I disappoint you? Those questions stayed unanswered. Now, lying there in the soft half-light, they felt heavier than ever before. Freddie had faced critics, rumors, illness, fear, but the thought of facing his father, truly facing him, frightened him in a way nothing else did, because this time there would be no encore. He turned his head slowly toward the window, watching dawn begin to soften the edges of the city. His reflection in the glass looked older, thinner, more vulnerable than the man the world knew. Time had stripped away his armor, and what remained was a son still longing for peace. Freddie had spent his life chasing freedom. Freedom to love, to create, to exist without apology. But freedom, he was learning, came with its own price. It sometimes meant leaving things unresolved. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. Someone entered the room gently, careful not to startle him. A familiar presence. Concerned, loving, but not the one his heart was aching for. "Are you awake?" the voice asked softly. Freddie nodded. "I was never very good at sleeping through important moments." The visitor hesitated before speaking again. "Your father called earlier." Freddie's breath caught just slightly. "What did he say?" Freddie asked, keeping his voice steady. "He asked how you were." That alone was unexpected. Freddie closed his eyes. For years, conversations with his father had been polite but distant, practical, rarely emotional. Concern was expressed carefully, indirectly. as if caring too openly might invite disappointment. He didn't say much, the voice continued, but he asked if he wanted to see him. The room seemed to shrink. Freddie felt his pulse quicken, his chest tighten with emotions he had spent a lifetime controlling. Fear, hope, regret, all colliding at once. He had imagined this moment countless times, but never like this, never with time pressing so close, never with words so urgently needed and so dangerously late. Yes, Freddie said finally, barely above a whisper. The answer surprised even him. After the visitor left, Freddie lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling. He felt exposed in a way no audience had ever made him feel. This wasn't about image or reputation. This was about forgiveness. And Freddie wasn't sure which of them needed it more. He wondered what his father saw when he looked at him now. The famous singer? The rebellious son? The boy who had once left home with dreams too strange to explain? Or simply a man nearing the end, seeking peace? Freddie's hands trembled slightly as he folded them over his chest. He took a slow, careful breath. He had sung to millions. He had spoken boldly to the world. But there was one conversation he had avoided his entire life. And now, there would be no hiding behind lights or lyrics. When his father finally walked into that room, everything left unsaid would be standing between them. And Freddie Mercury knew, with a certainty that frightened him, that the words he spoke next would matter more than any song he had ever written. Because this time, the silence would have an answer. The door opened slowly. Freddie Mercury heard it before he saw it. The soft creak of wood, the careful footsteps that stopped just short of the threshold. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence felt deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if both men understood that whatever came next would carry the weight of an entire lifetime. Jabal Sara stood in the doorway. He looked older than Freddie remembered, smaller somehow. His posture was still upright, disciplined, but time had softened the sharpness that once defined him. His hair was thinner, his face marked by lines earned through years of responsibility and restraint. Freddie's heart tightened. This wasn't the father of his memories. The man whose expectations felt immovable, whose approval always seemed just out of reach. This was an aging man standing before his son, unsure how to cross the distance that years had built. Farrakh, his father said quietly. The name landed with unexpected force. No one called him that anymore. Freddie swallowed hard. Father just stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. The sound echoed louder than it should have, sealing them into the moment. He stood near the foot of the bed, hands clasped behind his back, eyes scanning the room. The medical equipment, the dim light, the undeniable signs of fragility. You look tired, she said. Freddie smiled faintly. I suppose I finally learned how. Neither laughed. They stood there, suspended between what had been said and everything that hadn't. Freddie felt a familiar urge to fill the silence, to charm, to deflect, to soften the moment with humor. He resisted it. This wasn't performance. Jay cleared his throat. Your mother wanted to come, he said, but I thought perhaps this should be just us. Freddie nodded. He was grateful for that, though he couldn't quite explain why. I'm glad you came, Freddie said softly. Jay hesitated, then took a step closer. I should have come sooner. The admission startled Freddie. For years, apologies have been absent from their relationship, not because of cruelty, but because neither knew how to reach for them. Hearing one now felt disorienting. Freddie shifted slightly against the pillows. I didn't make it easy. No, Drew agreed. You didn't. But there was no accusation in his voice, only truth. They sat in silence again. Freddie studied his father's hands, the same hands that had once guided him, disciplined him, protected him, hands that now trembled faintly as they rested at his sides. I didn't understand your world, just said at last. Your choices, the life you built. Freddie's chest tightened. I know. I thought if I stayed firm, you would return to the path I knew. She continued. I believed discipline was love. Freddie closed his eyes briefly. I thought distance was freedom, he replied. I believed if I went far enough, it wouldn't hurt. Jay exhaled slowly, as if something heavy had finally been set down. We were both wrong, he said. The words hung between them. Simple, devastating, honest. Freddie felt tears gather unexpectedly. He had imagined anger, judgment, even rejection. He hadn't prepared for regret. Jim moved closer, pulling a chair beside the bed. He sat, posture stiff but intentional, meeting Freddie's gaze directly for the first time. "I watched you," Jim said quietly. "From a distance." Freddie's breath caught. "You did?" "Yes," his father replied. "I read about you. I listened. I saw what you became." "And?" Freddie asked, his voice barely steady. Jur's eyes softened. "You were brave." The word shattered something inside Freddie. Not successful. Not famous. Brave. A single tear escaped before he could stop it. He turned his face away, embarrassed by the vulnerability. "But you didn't look away." "I was afraid," she continued. "Afraid that if I said the wrong thing, I would lose you entirely." Freddie let out a quiet, broken laugh. "I was afraid you already had." Silence filled the space again, but this time it felt different. Not empty. Not distant. Shared. Joe reached out hesitantly, his hand hovering before finally resting gently over Freddie's. The contact was tentative, almost reverent. "You are my son," Joe said, "no matter how far you went." Freddie's throat tightened painfully. He had waited his entire life to hear something like that. And now, with time slipping through his fingers, the weight of everything left unsaid pressed down on him. There was something he needed to say. Something he had rehearsed in his mind countless times but never believed he would actually speak. Freddie took a careful breath. "Father," he began, voice trembling despite his effort to control it. "There's something I need to ask you." Jim nodded, grip tightening slightly. "Ask." Freddie's chest rose and fell. His heart pounded not with fear of rejection, but with the fear of honesty. "I know I caused you pain," Freddie said softly. "I know I disappointed you. I know I chose a life you never wanted for me." Joe opened his mouth to speak, but Freddie raised a hand gently. "Please," Freddie whispered, "let me finish." Joe nodded, eyes glistening. Freddie swallowed hard, gathering what little strength he had left. "Before it's too late," he said, his voice breaking, "I need to know if you can forgive me." The room seemed to stop breathing. Just stared at his son, stunned, not by the question, but by the vulnerability it carried. Freddie's hand shook now, his eyes fixed on his father's face, searching for an answer he didn't know how to survive without. Because in that moment, Freddie Mercury wasn't a legend. He was a son, kneeling emotionally before the man whose forgiveness he had chased his entire life. And Jabolsara's next words, whatever they would be, would decide whether peace was finally possible, or whether regret would remain the last thing between them. Jabolsara did not answer immediately. He remained seated beside the bed, his hand still resting over Freddie's, as if movement alone might shatter the moment. His eyes searched his son's face, not the public face known to millions, but the fragile one beneath it. The bravado was gone. The armor had finally been set aside. Freddie's chest tightened with every passing second. He had asked the question. Now he had to survive the answer. He inhaled slowly, his breath unsteady. When he spoke, his voice was lower than Freddie remembered, softer, worn by time and regret. "Farrak," he said again, using the name with care, "do you know what it is like to believe your love must be strict in order to be strong?" Freddie swallowed. "I think I'm just beginning to." Jim nodded. "I was raised to believe that discipline protects a child. That approval must be earned. I thought if I held firm, you would be safe." Freddie's eyes glistened. "I didn't feel safe," he admitted. "I felt invisible." The confession landed heavily between them. Jim closed his eyes for a moment, as if bracing against a truth he had long avoided. When he opened them again, they were wet with unshed tears. "I see that now," Jim said quietly, "and I am sorry." The word struck Freddie harder than any applause he had ever received. Sorry. Not conditional. Not restrained. Real. Freddie's breath broke. His shoulders trembled as he struggled to contain emotions he had suppressed for decades. He had imagined forgiveness as something dramatic, spoken loudly, declared clearly. Instead, it came gently. almost painfully tender. I never wanted to shame you, she continued. I wanted to guide you, but I was afraid of a world I didn't understand. Freddie nodded weakly. So was I. She tightened his grip slightly. When you left, I told myself you were choosing rebellion over family, but in truth, you were choosing survival. Freddie closed his eyes, tears finally escaping. I didn't know how to be both, he whispered. Your son and myself. Jer's voice cracked. I didn't know how to let you be both. Silence followed, but it was no longer heavy. It felt like release. Jer leaned forward slightly, his free hand trembling as it reached up to Freddie's face. He hesitated, then gently cupped his son's cheek, as if reassuring himself that this moment was real. You asked me if I forgive you, Jer said softly. Freddie's heart pounded. Yes, Jer said firmly. I forgive you. The words shattered something inside Freddie, not breaking him, but freeing him. A quiet sob escaped his chest. He covered his face briefly, overwhelmed, his body too weak to contain the rush of relief that flooded through him. Years of unanswered questions dissolved in that single sentence. Jer didn't look away. He didn't withdraw. I am proud of you, Jer added, not because you succeeded, but because you were brave enough to live honestly. Freddie lowered his hand slowly, eyes red, voice barely audible. That's all I ever wanted. Jer nodded. I know. They sat together like that for a long moment, father and son holding space for everything they could no longer change and everything they had finally said. But beneath the relief, something else stirred. Urgency. Freddie felt it in his chest, not pain, but awareness. Time was thin now. Every moment mattered. Father, Freddie said softly, there's something else. Just straightened slightly, attentive. Yes. Freddie took a slow, careful breath. I don't have much time. Jer's expression tightened, though he already knew. There are things I regret, Freddie continued. Not the life I lived, but the moments I missed, the distance I allowed to grow. Jer shook his head gently. Regret is a luxury, he said. Love is not. Freddie smiled faintly. You always did have a way with words. Jer managed a small smile in return. Freddie's strength wavered suddenly. His breathing became shallow, uneven. Jer noticed immediately. Farrick, he said urgently. You're tired. Freddie nodded. I am. Jer stood slowly, reluctant to let go but understanding. You should rest. Freddie tightened his grip briefly. Will you stay? Jer didn't hesitate. As long as you need. Relief washed over Freddie's face. As Jer settled back in the chair, the room grew quiet again, but this time it was peaceful. The kind of quiet that comes after storms, when the air finally clears. Freddie closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling at him. But before sleep claimed him, one final thought surfaced, fragile and terrifying. Forgiveness had come. Peace had followed. But there was still one truth left unspoken. A truth about goodbye. And Freddie Mercury knew, with heartbreaking clarity, that the next time he opened his eyes, he would need to find the courage to face not just his father, but the end itself. Freddie Mercury slept for a long time, not the restless sleep of pain or anxiety, but a deep, enveloping stillness that seemed to suspend time itself. Jabal Sara remained seated beside the bed, unmoving, listening to the soft rhythm of his son's breathing. Each rise and fall of Freddie's chest felt like a fragile promise, one that could not be taken for granted. Jer watched his son as a father watches a child for the first time, with awe, fear, and an overwhelming tenderness he had rarely allowed himself to show. When Freddie stirred again, the light in the room had changed. Afternoon sun filtered gently through the curtains, casting warm patterns across the walls. Freddie opened his eyes slowly and found his father still there. You stayed, Freddie murmured. Jer nodded. Of course. Freddie smiled faintly. You always were more dependable than I gave you credit for. Jer allowed a small, sad smile. And you were always braver than I allowed myself to admit. They shared a quiet moment, neither rushing to fill the space. The urgency that had once hovered between them had softened, replaced by something steadier, acceptance. Freddie shifted slightly, wincing as his body reminded him of its limits. Jill leaned forward instinctively. Easy, he said. Freddie exhaled. I used to hate being told that. I know, Jill replied gently. You wanted to run. I wanted to fly, Freddie corrected softly. Jill nodded. And you did. Freddie turned his gaze toward the window, watching clouds drift slowly across the sky. His voice grew quieter, more deliberate. I don't regret my life, he said. I regret thinking I had endless time. Jill followed his gaze. We all make that mistake. Freddie swallowed. I don't want you to remember me as someone who caused you worry. Jill's voice was firm now. You caused me wonder. Freddie looked at him, surprised. I worried, Jill admitted, but I also marveled. You lived in a way I never dared to. That frightened me and inspired me. The words settled gently into Freddie's chest. For years, he had believed his life embarrassed his father. Now, in this quiet room, he understood the truth was far more complex. I'm afraid, Freddie admitted suddenly. Jill didn't flinch. Of what? Of leaving things unfinished, Freddie said. Of being remembered incorrectly. Of silence. Jill considered this. Silence is not emptiness, he said. It is where truth rests when words are no longer needed. Freddie closed his eyes briefly. You've grown philosophical. Jill smiled faintly. Perhaps I finally learned how to listen. A nurse knocked softly and entered, checking Freddie's vitals with careful discretion. Jill stepped back, watching silently. When she left, Freddie reached out again. Father, he said, voice low, there's something I need from you. Jill returned to his side immediately. Anything. When I'm gone, Freddie continued, choosing each word with effort. I don't want anger between us to be what remains. Jill shook his head. There is none left. Then promise me, Freddie said, that you'll remember me as your son first, not the noise around me. Jill's eyes filled. I promise. Freddie nodded slowly, relief washing across his face. The exhaustion returned suddenly, heavier than before. Jill noticed the change immediately. You should rest again, he said softly. Freddie hesitated, then nodded. Will you still be here when I wake? Jill didn't hesitate. Yes. Freddie closed his eyes, comforted by the certainty in that answer. His breathing slowed again, each breath softer than the last. Jill sat quietly, his thoughts drifting through memories. A young boy at a piano, arguments left unresolved, pride expressed too late. And yet, here they were, still together, still connected. Hours passed. When Freddie stirred once more, it was dusk. The room glowed amber, shadows stretching long and gentle. Freddie opened his eyes and looked directly at his father. It's getting close, he said calmly. Jill's chest tightened. Yes. Freddie's voice was steady now. I don't want fear to be the last thing I feel. Jill leaned closer. Then let it be love. Freddie smiled faintly. I think it already is. They sat in silence again, hands still joined. There was no drama left. No grand speeches waiting to be delivered. Only presence. Freddie's grip weakened slightly. Father, he whispered. Thank you for forgiving me. Jill's voice broke for the first time. Thank you for coming home. Freddie's eyes closed gently. His breathing grew slower, shallower, but peaceful. Just stayed exactly where he was. Outside, the world continued as it always had. But inside that room, something sacred was unfolding. Not an ending, but a completion. Because before the final goodbye could come, there was still one last moment Freddie Mercury needed. A moment not of forgiveness, but of release. The night arrived gently. There was no sudden shift, no dramatic signal that marked the final hours. Only a deepening quiet, as if the world itself understood it was time to lower its voice. Freddie Mercury lay still in his bed, his breathing shallow but calm, his face softened in a way Jabal had never seen before. This was not the face of struggle. It was a face of peace. Just sat beside him, holding his son's hand with both his own now, afraid that even the smallest distance might break something sacred. He watched Freddie's chest rise and fall, each breath a fragile gift. He did not pray aloud. He did not beg. He simply stayed. Freddie stirred slightly, eyelids fluttering open, His eyes found his father immediately, as if he had never stopped looking for him at all. "You're here," Freddie whispered. "Yes," Joe replied, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I'm here." Freddie smiled, not the theatrical smile the world adored, but a small, honest one, the kind meant for only one person. "I was afraid," Freddie said softly, "that I would leave before you knew, before you understood." Joe leaned closer. "I understand now." Freddie exhaled, a sound that carried relief more than breath. "Then I can go." Joy's grip tightened reflexively. "You don't have to hurry." Freddie shook his head faintly. "I'm not hurrying," he said. "I'm ready." The words did not sound like surrender. They sounded like acceptance. For years, Freddie Mercury had lived as if time were endless, stretching moments into performances, nights into legends, life into spectacle. Now, stripped of all excess, time had become something else entirely. Intimate, precious, complete. Freddie's gaze drifted toward the window, where moonlight brushed the edges of the room. "I spent my life being loud," he murmured. "I didn't know quiet could feel like this." Just smiled through tears. "Quiet is where truth lives." Freddie nodded. "I think I finally hear it." His breathing slowed further. Jeff felt it immediately, the subtle change that no machine could explain. He leaned closer, resting his forehead lightly against Freddie's hand. "You were always my son," Joe whispered. "I just didn't know how to say it." Freddie's fingers twitched faintly in response. "You said it now." That was enough. The room seemed to hold its breath as Freddie's chest rose one final time, slowly, carefully, and then fell. There was no pain, no fear, no struggle, only stillness. Joe did not move. He stayed exactly where he was, holding his son's hand, feeling the absence arrive not as a shock, but as a soft, irreversible truth. Tears fell freely now, not from regret, but from love fully realized. Freddie Mercury, the man the world knew as untouchable, had left quietly, as a son at peace. Later, when others entered the room, they would speak softly, respectfully. They would confirm what you already knew. They would offer condolences, words, procedures. You heard none of it clearly. What he felt was something far deeper than grief. Completion. In the days that followed, the world would mourn loudly. Newspapers would print headlines. Fans would gather, sing, cry, remember. Freddie Mercury would be immortalized as a legend, a voice that refused to be forgotten. But in that quiet room, something far more important had happened. A son had been forgiven. A father had spoken love aloud. A lifetime of distance had closed gently at the end. Freddie Mercury did not leave carrying regret. He left carrying peace. And that peace, born not of fame or applause, but forgiveness, would outlive every song, every performance, every myth built around his name. Because legends may belong to the world, but peace belongs to the soul. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who loves Freddie Mercury. If this story inspired you, remember, even legends face battles unknown to the world. Subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone who loves Freddie Mercury.